And if you have your Bible, do turn with me to Acts chapter 10, where we're going to continue this morning. Acts chapter 10. It's very good to be with the folk on the live stream as well, and nice to know that Paddy and Liddy and family are down in Plymouth now, and the folk in Lichfield and in South Lincolnshire are with us, and wherever else you're joining us from as well. Now we're back to our Astonishing sermons today. You'll be pleased to hear this series that we've called Astonishing because of all the astonishing things that are happening in this part of the book of Acts. So we're going to turn to our reading for this morning, Acts chapter 10, verses 1 to 23. Acts chapter 10, verses 1 to 23, and we're going to go to halfway through verse 23. This all sounds very loud to me in the room this morning. Is that overly loud? Mike's already put his sound-restricted headphones on ready for the sermon. So, so here we go, Acts chapter 10, and the reading's on the screen as well. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day, at about 3 p.m, he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, "Cornelius." Cornelius stared at him in fear. "What is it, Lord?" he asked. The angel answered, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea." When the angel who spoke to him had gone, Cornelius called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier who was one of his attendants. He told them everything that had happened and sent them to Joppa. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened, and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its 4 corners. It contained all kinds of 4-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. While Peter was wondering about the meaning of this vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate. They called out, asking if Simon, who was known as Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Simon, 3 men are looking for you, so get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them." Peter went down and said to the men, "I'm the one you are looking for. Why have you come?" The men replied, "We have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people. A holy angel told him to ask you to come to his house so that he could hear what you have to say." Then Peter invited the men into the house to be his guests. Amen. Well, very occasionally, something happens that changes the world forever. I think the global pandemic that we've just been through will turn out to be like that in some ways. Life may not be the same again. Its effects on our way of life will go on for a long time to come. People will perhaps work from home much more than they used to. People might go out to socialize less than they used to. Will we ever shake hands and exchange germs in that warm greeting way with each other like we used to? Who knows? Our reading today tells us of another much older world-changing event. Although it's impossible, I think, for us to grasp the significance of what happened. A Jewish man accepting hospitality from a Gentile, and not only a Gentile, but one who was a leader in the occupying army that had inflicted great suffering upon them. Perhaps it would be something more akin to this. There's an amazing story about Corrie ten Boom. You may well have heard the story before. I think I've probably told it before. That's normally what happens with my stories. They go round and round and round again. But she and her sister Betsy hid Jewish people during the Holocaust, and eventually they were caught and taken to a concentration camp where both her sister and her father died. She survived, and after her release, she traveled the world sharing her message of Christian faith and the lessons that she had learned in such great suffering. And on one occasion, she went back to speak in Germany after the war, and at the end of the meeting, people came to talk to her, as they often did on such occasions, and she saw a man coming to speak to her whom she recognized. And this is what she said about it afterwards. She said it came back with a rush. That huge room with its harsh overhead lights, the pathetic pile of dresses and shoes in the center of the floor, the shame of walking naked past this man. I could see my sister's frail form ahead of me, ribs sharp beneath the parchment skin. And now he was in front of me, hand thrust out. A fine message, Fräulein, he said. It was the first time, she said, since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. You mentioned Ravensbrück in your talk, he was saying. I was a guard there. No, he did not remember me. But since that time, he went on, I have become a Christian. I know that God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there, but I would like to hear it from your lips as well. Fräulein, again the hand came out. Will you forgive me? It could not have been many seconds, she said, that he stood there, hand held out, but it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing that I had ever had to do. Jesus, help me, I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, she said, I thrust my hand into the hand stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. For a long moment we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. It's an astonishing account, isn't it? God's grace flowing over boundary after boundary. Philip Yancey has a beautiful line. Grace, he says, grace, like water, always flows downwards to the lowest point. And there are times that we can't get our minds around just how low God's grace can flow. But if we can begin to get our minds around that encounter between Corrie ten Boom, the former prisoner, and her former guard, we might be able to begin to get our minds around something of what was happening as Peter met Cornelius. So today's message is all about visions and visitors. First, there was a vision of a visitor, and then there was a vision followed by a visitor. A vision of a visitor and a vision and a visitor. So firstly, a vision of a visitor. Acts chapter 10, verse 1. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. Giving generously to those in need, praying regularly. Doesn't that remind you of Tabitha we were thinking about last time? She was the disciple who died, but she was known whilst living for always doing good and helping the poor. Do you remember that? We thought about what an example she is to us as Christians. Are we doing all the good we can as we seek to follow Jesus in our daily lives? It seems this centurion, Cornelius, was doing just that. He was a good man. Have you noticed that the Bible only ever has good things to say about centurions? Jesus once met a centurion. Do you remember that? In Matthew chapter 8, a centurion came to Jesus and said, Lord, my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly. And Jesus said, shall I come and heal him? To which the centurion replied, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus was amazed at his faith. It's the only time we're told that Jesus was amazed at anyone's faith. And speaking of this Gentile centurion, Jesus said, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such a great faith. The Bible has good things to say about centurions. That was the centurion whose faith amazed Jesus. Then there was the centurion who stood at the foot of the cross of Jesus. When he saw the way in which Jesus died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. And now there's this centurion, Cornelius, a good man. He and his whole family with him, Luke tells us, were devout and God-fearing. They were Gentiles. They were not Jewish. They hadn't been born into a Jewish family. They hadn't fully converted to Judaism, but they did believe the Jewish faith. And they worshipped God in the ways that Jewish people worshipped him. They tried to live their lives according to Jewish standards. That's what it means when it says they were devout and God-fearing. And a mark of Cornelius' devotion was that he was known for giving generously to those in need and praying regularly, just like the Jews were supposed to do. He was a good man. And that meant something to God. We'll come in a moment to this astonishing vision that he sees, a vision of an angel. And the first thing the angel says to him after calling him by name is this, halfway through verse 4, your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. It's a beautiful phrase. It's the language of Old Testament sacrifices. When they used to burn sweet-smelling incense at the altar, they would speak of the smoke of the incense floating up into heaven before the throne of God, a beautiful aroma pleasing to him. And Cornelius' good deeds, his generosity and his prayers were pleasing to the Lord. He had seen it. The Lord knew that Cornelius was a good man. How about you? I'm sure you're a good person in all sorts of ways. We're in a church service here, but in a sense it hasn't got much to do with religion. Human beings are capable of doing astonishing good, regardless of religion. I mean, think about the homeless shelter next door, the homeless work. I don't know what they believe. I'm sure there's a range of belief. But they're doing great good. Think of all the youth and community work that goes on this site. Think of all those who are going out to the borders of Ukraine, and all those who have given money and clothing and other items, and those who have registered to take refugees into their homes. Human beings are capable of doing astonishing good. But here's the lesson that Cornelius learned. Being good isn't good enough. Being good isn't good enough. As good as he was, there was so much that Cornelius was missing. And actually, that's a lesson that the other centurion learned when his faith amazed Jesus. When the chips were down, he came to see that in many of the most important matters of life, he was absolutely helpless. When someone so dear to him was suffering so greatly and his heart broke for him, there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Being good was not good enough. And we might very well be good people. We are, I'm sure you are. But we know, don't we, that being good isn't good enough. We know that, we know what it is to have people who are close to us, suffering, being absolutely helpless to do anything about it. We know even in our best moments that there is so much that we're missing out on. Even in the midst of all our goodness, there's unimaginably more for good people today, just as there was for the good man Cornelius all those years ago. But Cornelius needed a vision of a visitor to help him see it. At 3 p.m, Luke tells us he had a vision of an angel. Shall we just notice that little detail that Luke points out there? He tells us it happened at 3 p.m. That was one of the times in the day when devout and God-fearing people, like the Jewish people they followed, prayed. It was a set hour of prayer. This astonishing thing that Cornelius saw happened when he was praying in a very ordinary and routine way. It's a lesson that I keep banging on about at the moment, isn't it? Don't just sit around waiting for something astonishing to happen. Get on with the very ordinary and routine things that God has given us to do, to know Him and serve Him. And occasionally, as we do those things, astonishing things will happen. But if Cornelius hadn't done the ordinary routine thing at 3 o'clock that afternoon, he might have missed it all. And the astonishing thing may not have happened at all. Cornelius was terrified at this vision. The angel reassured him and gave him some instructions with precise geographical directions. Send men to Joppa, he said, to bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea. And Cornelius did as he was told. He sent 3 people to go and get Peter. And then the scene changes. It's as if the camera pans around from the house of Cornelius to the house where Peter was staying, going just ahead of these men who were sent to fetch him. And so now we're with Peter in the home of Simon the tanner, where we last left him when we were thinking about these readings last time, a couple of weeks ago. And the stage is now set for the next astonishing event. Cornelius had a vision of a visitor. Peter receives a vision which is followed by some visitors. It might all have been very nice for Cornelius to think about inviting Peter round to his house, regardless of the astonishing way in which the thought came to him. But in the culture of that day, it would have been unthinkable for Peter to accept the invitation. There was a significant, almost insurmountable problem. Even though Cornelius and his family were all devout and God-fearing, they were still Gentiles. And Jews like Peter did not associate with Gentiles like Cornelius. To make this happen, it would need a supernatural breakthrough, even greater than what had just happened with Cornelius. And that's just what happened. It was about midday. Peter went to pray. Again, we could notice that the astonishing thing happened as he was doing the very ordinary and routine thing of praying. He went onto the roof of the house, which wasn't a strange thing to do in those days. It might be more strange here in this country, but you know that in that dry, hot country, the houses often had flat roofs with staircases at the side, a quiet place to go, a little bit like the rooftop terraces that are so fashionable here now. People pay an arm and a leg for them. And unsurprisingly, perhaps at midday, he was praying, and Peter became hungry. And he too had an astonishing vision. He saw heaven opened, and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its 4 corners. It contained all kinds of 4-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds. And then he heard an astonishing command. In fact, he heard 3 astonishing commands. And the first one, a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." The sort of thing that would sound horrifying to the vegetarians amongst us. Have we got any vegetarians? I know we have. What a horrifying thing to hear. Get up, kill and eat these animals. Well, it was horrifying for Peter as well. And he said, "Surely not, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The law of the Old Testament was very clear. Jews should not eat certain kinds of animals. They were to view them as unclean. And the command would have been astonishing to Peter. He probably would have seen it as some kind of test of his faithfulness to the Jewish law. And then there was the second command. Do not call anything impure that God has made clean. We'll come back to that. And that all happened 3 times. And then the sheet was taken back to heaven. The vision was over. And Peter was used to being told 3 times, things 3 times, wasn't he, when he had to learn a lesson. 3 times he denied the Lord. And when the Lord reinstated him, Jesus asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" Well, the timing was astonishing. Just after this, while Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men sent by Cornelius found out where Simon's house was and stopped at the gate, and they called out asking if Peter was staying there. And Peter was still on the roof, still thinking about that vision, and he was given a 3rd command. The Spirit said to him, 3 men are looking for you, so get up and go downstairs. Do not hesitate to go with them, for I have sent them. And did you notice the visitors tried to persuade Peter to go with them on the basis of Cornelius' goodness? They said to Peter, "We have come from Cornelius the centurion. He is a righteous and God-fearing man who is respected by all the Jewish people." They told Peter about the goodness of Cornelius, thinking that that would convince Peter to go with them, but Peter would need a lot more persuading than that. Ordinarily, no amount of persuasion would have persuaded Peter to go with them. No amount of status or righteousness and fear of God in Cornelius, no amount of respect for him and others would have prevailed on Peter to go with these men. Cornelius' goodness wasn't good enough. It took a supernatural breaking in, and because of that astonishing vision, Peter did what he would moments earlier have thought unthinkable, and he invited these Gentile visitors into his house to be his guests. And the next day, as we'll hear next week, he went with them to be Cornelius' guest. So there was a vision of a visitor for a Gentile. Then there was a vision followed by some visitors for a Jew. And it was all about the fulfillment of an ancient vision. You see, thousands of years before this, God had made a promise to Abraham, the founding father of the Jewish people. This is what God said to him, Genesis chapter 12, very famous words, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." And from that time onwards, the people of God in the Old Testament looked forward to a time when the boundaries would be broken down and people of every nation would be gathered into the blessings of the Lord's chosen people. And Jesus himself spoke of that time, which was soon to come. After he had spoken of the amazing faith of that centurion, he added in Matthew 8, "I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." And it had already started to happen. The centurion whose servant Jesus healed, he was already sharing in the blessings of the people of God. God's grace has started to flow over the boundaries and break them down. It happened in the early church as believers in Jesus, filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, went about their lives. Philip met the Ethiopian eunuch and spoke to him about Jesus, and he heard the message, and he believed in Jesus, and he was baptized. And he started to share in the blessings of the people of God. It was happening little by little, person by person, but the significance of it all had gone unnoticed. The Jewish Christians were still reluctant to associate with the Gentiles. It took a supernatural breaking through to demonstrate that the time had come for the ancient promise in that ancient vision to be fulfilled. Because of the death of Jesus on the cross and his resurrection, no one was beyond the limits of God's grace. Do not call anything impure what God has made clean, the voice said to Peter in that vision. Grace like water was flowing downwards over every boundary, even to the lowest places on earth. And today, his grace flows over every boundary into your life as well. And no matter how far away you feel and no matter how low you feel, God's grace can flow to you too. There may not have been any astonishing visions of angels and any astonishing visions, but in the end, your conversion is equally astonishing. Your goodness and my goodness isn't good enough either. There is so much more for us as there was for Cornelius. When the chips are down, there are all sorts of ways in life that we are helpless, just like that centurion who went to see Jesus. But we will never see it unless there is a supernatural breaking into our lives too. Just as there was for Cornelius and Peter and that other centurion when he came face to face with Jesus all those years ago. It might not involve visions and angels and so on, but the good news of Jesus coming into your life, enabling you by his grace to become one of his followers, is just as astonishing and supernatural as anything else that has ever happened for anyone else. God's grace has flowed over every boundary, and it comes into your life too. And as that grace flows into your life, it also flows through your life into the lives of others. That's how it was for Peter. Did you notice? It wasn't the angel who proclaimed the good news of Jesus to the centurion, although the angel could have done. That was Peter's job. Cornelius didn't go to Peter. Peter had to go to him, a Jew going into the home of a Gentile, an astonishing demonstration of the power of God's grace, and Peter got to be a part of it all. Peter was caught up in this flow of grace. It flowed into his life, and then it flowed through him into the lives of others, just as it will for you too. The gospel spreads from heart to heart and from home to home as Christians who have been caught up in the flow of God's grace speak of the good news of Jesus. And so we're going to worship the Lord again now as we respond to all of this. Do come back up, musicians. And as we sing and as we receive bread and wine in Holy Communion, let's open ourselves again to God's grace, which is flowing to us even here and even now. His grace is still flowing downwards like water and will flow into the lowest areas of your life and mine as we open ourselves to him. And as his grace flows into you, it will also flow through you into the lives of others and open your eyes to the possibilities of what he can achieve in this world, breaking through boundary after boundary. Let's celebrate this grace of God now and open our lives to him afresh as we worship and then as we share bread and wine together. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. It chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it. I don't deserve it. And still, Lord, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Let's sing together.